はい、マティアスさん、今日は本当にインタビューに応じてくださりありがとうございます。簡単な自己紹介をお願いしていいですか？
Absolutely. And thank you so much for having me on this call. My name is Matius Madou. I'm the CTO and co-founder of Secure Code Warrior. I started my career at Ghent University, where I pursued a PhD in application security. With my PhD, I worked on static analysis solutions. Ultimately, I figured out it was easy to find problems in code if you never ever tell the developer how to develop secure code in the first place. Hence why we started Secure Code Warrior, with the focus on the people and making sure they know what to do on how to develop secure code.
And today's interview purpose is to promote application security basic to the Japanese customers. So it will be better to include some very basic concept to promote the application security. This is all just the kickoff interview.
Sounds good. Yeah, no. And I'm happy to talk about the combination of tooling and people. So you need tools, that's absolutely fantastic, but ultimately you need the people that are working with the tools, but also to understand what they need to do. Developers need to understand what to do, how to do it. So it's a combination of tooling and people.
いや、興味深いですね。そうするとマティアスさんは長くコーディングするっていうことそのものも大好きだし、そしてそれをセキュアなものにするっていう問題意識も長く持ってらっしゃったってことですか？
Absolutely. So first of all, when I started doing application security, it was of self-realization. I used to be a coder, and in the beginning, you make very simple mistakes where you're like syntactical mistakes, where you realize that Java lines end with a semicolon, and you're like, oh my God, Java lines ends with a semicolon. I have to do that. In the next phase, you start to make functions, and you realize how functions can work together, how you can put functions in different files, and you start to think about the architecture and how different components work together. Ultimately, at the end of the day, you start to realize like, oh my God, our customers are doing something different with my application than what I intended it to be doing. They explore some functionality which I didn't really implement, or did I? So unintentionally, I added some functionality with significant security implications into my application. I'm starting to realize, oh my God, people can see our database. People can actually read into our database and change stuff in our database. That was not intended. So at that moment, I realized like, there's something called application security, which means we need to develop our code with security in mind so that the functionality is there, but there's no more functionality. People cannot misuse our application and do things with our application that were not intended, with huge security implications.
エンジニアがやはりこう動く機能をちゃんと作って、そしてそれがちゃんと動くっていうことを目指していると思うんですね、主に。だけど、機能はしっかりしているけど、セキュリティがまずいというソフトウェアが、すごいたくさんできているわけです。で、そこでエンジニアにセキュリティを教えるとなると、大抵めんどくさがられるわけなんですよね。この問題って、やっぱり全世界どこにでもあるもんなんでしょうか？
Unfortunately, it is a common theme around the world, where functionality takes the very first place, which makes sense, right? We want to make an application, the functionality needs to be there, and we only want more code, we want more functionality, and everything has to be done, yesterday. If you ask when the deadline is, it was actually yesterday. So there's absolutely a focus on functionality features into applications. The problem is it's a long-term game. Application security problems will pop up if we do not develop code in a secure way along the way. And the more code you create in an unsecure way, the more problems that will manifest in the code, and they will pop up. They will pop eventually. The realization can come in two ways. First of all, when the burglar is into your neighbor's house, that's when you start to realize you have a problem. So when your competitor is attacked, when your competitor goes down, that's when you start to realize, oh my God, what happened over there? Let's make sure we do not have something like that. That's an ideal scenario. The unideal scenario is when they go after you. If you are the slowest running zebra in the pack and they come after you, well, that is problematic. So quite often the realization comes the hard way from being bitten, or hopefully it's your neighbor that is bitten.
いやー、面白いですね。確かに日本でも他社のセキュリティ事故ですとか、自社でもとんでもない指摘をお客様から受けるということで、セキュリティを何とかしなければっていうふうにモチベートされるっていうことは、あると思います。ちなみに私はマティウスさんのブログをいくつかいつも見てるんですけれども、そこでやはり高品質なソフトウェアはセキュアなソフトウェアであるという言葉が何度か繰り返されているのを見ました。でもそのコンセプトをエンジニアにしっかり共感してもらうには結構大変なんじゃないかなと思うんですよね。共感してもらいたいんですけど、どう思いますか？So
absolutely. So my take on convincing developers that it's a good idea to think about developing secure code is that notion of it's only at the end of the cycle. It's only when you become a full rounded developer that you start to realize that security is important. I do see around the world more and more emphasis from organizations on hiring developers which own that skill of creating secure code, to create qualitative code so they can ship reliable code. That is ultimately the goal of an organization. They want to ship reliable code and they take a long-term view. So in that particular scenario, I do see more and more organizations specifically asking developers like, hey, are you qualified to write qualitative code, to write secure code? And how can you prove that? Do you understand, to name something, the OWASP top 10? Do you know what it is? Have you ever, developed code? And what kind of measures do you take into consideration to avoid problems like that? In my mind, it is twofold, where there need to be tools in place, but there definitely need to be people and training in place, because we cannot forget that ultimately it's the people who write the code, it is the people who operate the systems, it's the people who scan the code, and it's the people that need to collaborate with each other to develop secure code. So ultimately, if you're a developer, think about becoming part of this particular movement. Think about becoming part of creating secure code. I'm confident it's going to help you in the long run as well. I'm confident that you will not be, picked on is the wrong word, but you will not be picked on in an organization like, oh my God, there's a lot of problems and it all comes down to this particular person. If you try to do your best, if you try to develop secure code and help others in writing secure code, I think automatically you will rise in the organization and you will be seen as a reliable person that can help other people in doing something good for the organization.
クリアですね。確かにね、ソースコードアナリシスツールを使うと、たくさんそのソースコードに関するセキュリティ問題が指摘されるんだけど、今大急ぎで作らないといけない機能にはあまり関係ないしと思って、それを見過ごしてしまう人たち、サプレスしてしまう人たちもいるし、そしてあと実際にはトレーニングが足りていないためにエラーメッセージだとかね、そのウォーニングの意味がよくわからない、深刻さもいまいちよくわからない、そういうことでツールは入れたけれども活用がうまく進まないっていう、そういう悩みのある人もいるんですね。やっぱりそれはトレーニングを意識せずにツールをやっちゃうからいけないんでしょうか
？Absolutely. And I would like to give you an example here of an organization that we're working with. So that particular organization did not buy a static analysis solution first. We always thought that training came after people deploy a static analysis solution. Why? Because when you deploy a static analysis solution 4 or 5 years down the track, you start to realize it's not really going down our vulnerability count. We put the baseline in place and the vulnerability level stays kind of the same. It's not going down. And at 4 or 5 years down the track, you say, well, we want to make it go down, so we need training. That was one of our beliefs. However, we've learned that certain organizations these days start with training. They start with training because in their philosophy, what they say is, well, it does not make sense to find problems in code if we just developed code for 30, 40 years without thinking about security. We know it's going to be bad. And we know that our people will not know what to do. So what we do now is we start with training, we start with upskilling our developers. So eventually, if we run a static analysis solution, they will be, oh, absolutely, I understand why this is a problem, but I also know how to fix that particular problem. So I'm not going one or the other way. I think it's an interaction between finding problems in code and making sure the developers know what to do. But our beliefs that there was only training after a static analysis solution, well, we refuted our own beliefs, and now we say, hey, you know what? We need to upskill people first so they know what to do, they can handle the problem, and they can write secure code.
いや、なるほど。面白いですね。大抵の企業はもう最初ダストツールですっかり疲れて、ブラックボックステストではどうやって直したらいいかわからないから今度サストツールを入れて、でサストツールを入れてもいまいちよくわからないからその次に進まないっていう企業がやっぱり多いんですよ。OWASP トップ10全然知らない企業もたくさんあるし、そこでトレーニングをっていうふうになるんですけど、そのツールが教えてくれるとなんかこのエンジニアじゃない人は勝手に思っていてですね、それで結果的にセキュリティについては全く見ないふりして進んじゃうっていうようなそういうケースがね多いんです。
Absolutely. So I love your question because it is the entire idea of shifting left. So 10, 15, even 20 years ago, we found problems in code, but they manifested themselves when the code was live, it was in production. And we're like, oh my God, we need to do something. Like, how many of these things do we have? If we put this particular input into our application crashes or do something funky. But how many of these things do we have? And that's where black box testing comes into play. And you're trying to figure out, like, how many of these do we have? Do we have 10? Do we have 100? It doesn't tell you where to fix it, but at least, you know, like, well, it's pretty bad. So we go more to the left. We go more to, hey, when the code was created or when the code is created, where you're like, oh my God, with static analysis solution, we can try to figure out how many of these things we have, but also where are they in the code? Okay, now that we know where they are in the code, can we fix it? And developers like, well, but it works from a functional perspective. It works. It's only if you do something funky that it doesn't work. So why would I need to fix that? And that's, again, where you shift left all the way to the person that is writing the code and educating the person. Well, it's, yes, we understand from a functional perspective, your code does the thing that you said it was going to do. However, it has security implications. It has security implications because, well, people can see each other's bank account statements, for example, and all those funky stuff. So if you shift all the way left, then you end up with, oh my God, we need to educate the developer. We need to educate the person that is creating the code. It does not make sense to build more walls around the software. No, we have to really focus on getting it right from the start. And if there are problems, the question about, by the way, I'm a fan of firewalls. We need firewalls. But you also need to ask the question, why do we need firewalls? We're building walls around something that is broken. Okay, maybe we should fix the broken stuff, and maybe we should harden the software and create the software as good as we can before we put walls around the software. So your idea of, hey, we go from dynamic testing to static testing all the way to the developers, the entire concept of shifting left, we call it start left. We want to start with the developer and make sure he's educated. We still need the tools to find the problems because, you know, we're all humans. We can make mistakes. So make sure there are tools in place that can say, oh, by the way, you've still made a couple of mistakes, but the developer is educated. The developer knows how to fix the problem, so the developer can actually do it. We still need the monitoring in production. We all know new problems come out. So we want to start left and then go all the way to the right.
なるほど。いいですね。どうすればいいのか、あるいは何が求められているのかということを最も最初の段階でインプットしたり、トレーニングしたりしないと、そもそもできるようになりたいとも思わないし、できるようになるとも思えないというわけですよね。で、よく私たちの場合は、そのいわゆるツール、セキュリティテストツールをどんどん左に持っていくっていう方法は、シフトレフトを啓発していく上でもごく初期のというか相当古めのシフトレフトだと思っていて、今現状で動いているプロダクトが一体どのような状況なのかだとか、それがどういうそのセキュリティクロスファンクションを持っている必要があるのかっていうところから、その機能の裏側に セキュリティがあるんじゃなくて、機能の一部にそのセキュアで安心して運用できる機能を作るにはどうしたらいいかということを見つけるということが一番最初なんじゃないかなというふうに思っています。
Absolutely. So I think security is just part of quality. And if you look into an organization, if you look at the people in an organization, well, there's no separate quality. Well, there's still Q&A, don't get me wrong, but quality is part of everybody's job. It's not that there's 3 or 4 people only responsible for quality and the developers, they're like, well, we can do whatever we want. It's those 3 people that are responsible for quality. I think the same is true for security. It is not 2 or 3 people that are responsible for security and everybody else can do whatever they want to do. So let's look at a little bit of data. How can we win this game? If we look at the data, then for every 100 developers, there are 2 people in charge of security. So 2 people in the AppSec group guiding 100 developers, which is a lot of people, in writing secure code day in, day out. As you can see, that is impossible. 2 people cannot, guide 100 people. So now the question is, how can we bring the 100 people on the journey in writing secure code? And if you have the 100 people, we should make sure they are security aware. So when did they go through an awareness training? How many are security champions? How many of these 100 people can help their peers in writing secure code? So for me, the ancient idea of there are 2 people in charge of security per 100 developers, we will never win this game. Just like quality is not like that as well. Quality is not, there's 2 people and 100 people can do whatever they want. We need to bring the developers onto the journey and help them in writing qualitative code, but also secure code.
いや、もうすごい興味深いですね。まさにね、そういうケースでどう考えたらいいのかという質問を今日本当に用意してたんですよ。
Absolutely. And I cannot agree more that we need to break with what we've done 10 years, 10, 15 years ago. 10, 15 years ago, the developers like, well, there's this group called application security. Aren't they responsible for security? It says security. It's even in their name. So I would assume we just write code and they are responsible for security. And I'll have to be honest, back in the day, the setup was not ideal either because security only came back with problems. They came back and said, oh my God, your code is ugly. It doesn't, from a security perspective, it is absolutely terrible. And that is not a good way to start the collaboration. So right now, I think we need to figure out how we can collaborate between application security and developers to jointly make secure code. And maybe to add one more thing, the objectives should be aligned. And quite often I see a problem in organizations over there. The objective of the organization should be to ship reliable code as often as we can. That is an objective, and everything should align to that particular objective. One thing that is not an objective and that cannot be an objective for an application security team is to find as many problems as possible and try to find more problems next month. Unfortunately, that doesn't really line up with the objective. The objective should be, how can we help you remediate these problems? How can we lower the problems? How can we make sure that, next month we find even less problems, not by hiding problems, but making sure that people are upskilled and we take down that baseline, that should be an objective.
そうですね。確かに目標と、計測可能なものがあると、だんだん自分たちのスキルも上がっていってるとか、あるいは自分たちがまだケアできていない問題は何なのかとか、そういう足りていないスキルが何なのかということが結構クリアになっていきますもんね。で、そういうことで、今、マティアスさんは、Secure Code Warrior という、企業を起業されて、そしてそこでサービスを展開されているんですけれども、興味深いですね。競技会形式というか、どちらかというとゲーミフィケーションがすごくインプリメンテーションされてるんですけど、その中でいつも気にかけているというか、どういったことをその競技形式で学んでほしいと思っているんでしょうか。
So absolutely. There's a couple ways that we differ from what other organizations are doing. Sure, we sprinkled some gamification on top of our platform to make it fun and engaging. It's not a game, but we did sprinkle it over to our platform. Why? Because we think developers have a natural interest in games and being a little bit more competitive. The real difference between our platform and our competitors, or what used to be in the market 5-6 years ago, is we really focus on making sure that the training is actionable. It is not videos that people are watching. It is not one language, only Java, and on a day-to-day basis, they are using .NET. What we focused on, and it was a huge investment, is we want to provide language and framework-specific training to developers. So if you're in an organization and you are a Java EE developer, well, we can provide you with training in Java. If you're a COBOL developer, we can even service you with COBOL training, with COBOL examples, with COBOL code. So when you look at the code, it should be familiar to you, and you should be able to apply your knowledge the next day in your work. That is super important. And we do that at scale. So we do that at scale. So if you have 10,000 people and you do not even know what language they're using, you can actually roll out our program to 10,000 people, and they will select the language and framework they need, and they will automatically provide it with the right training. What is super important to me is that notion of being relevant. What does it mean to be relevant? Well, to me, if a developer is not using a database, it doesn't make sense to give him training on a category that specifically is for databases. It doesn't make sense. So for us, what does super relevant mean? It has to be in the language and the framework that they're using on a day-to-day basis. They should be able to customize it and say, hey, you know what? This is the problem in our organization. We see it from our SaaS solution. We see it from our DaaS solution. Cross-site scripting is the problem, and I want to eradicate that across the board. Well, with our training, we made it scalable so you can roll it out to all your developers. And my objective is not to boil the water. My objective is to do one thing, but do it really, really good. So if your problem is, say, SQL injection, well, then eradicate that. Make sure that the entire organization is upskilled and that problem is gone forever into your organization. That is our objective with our training. So we focused on doing one thing really, really well instead of trying to do something generic and something that doesn't work essentially.
なるほど。それで、セキュアコードウォリアーの中でのバリエーションが、あれほど多岐にわたっているということなんですね。結構様々な流行りの言語とかフレームワークがあるので大変ですけども、でもきっと利用している人たちにとっては、すぐに使える、すぐに活用できるというところが大きなポイントになっているというわけですね。
It's unfortunately the only way that it's going to work. Think about normal, regular languages. It doesn't make sense to provide a person with an English class. If you want to speak Japanese, it doesn't work. It has to be relevant. So use that analogy with developers who receive a training in a particular language and on a day-to-day basis, they're using another language. Well, it doesn't make sense, right? Like if we talk about spoken languages, it immediately makes sense. But then for developers, they're like, well, but still, it's similar. Well, it's not the same, right?
そういう意味では、開発言語って、普段のこの喋ってる言語とは違って、その全世界の人が同じ言語でプログラミングしている限りですよ。やっぱりそのお互いにバリューを伝えやすいみたいなところがあるっていうのは結構魅力的かなというふうに思います。たとえね、その説明が英語だったとしても、でもやっぱりそのプログラミング言語の中でのクオリティが、プログラミング言語を使って論じられるっていうのは結構面白いなと思いますね。
Agreed.
じゃあ今日はね、結構いろいろ面白いことをたくさん教えてくださるので、まだまだ質問したくなってくるんですけれども、今日はこれぐらいにしておきたいと思います。日本では一生懸命良いプロダクトを作るために、また良いサービスを維持するために頑張っている、セキュリティチャンピオンたちがいるわけなんですね。なんか温かいメッセージを一言いただけるでしょうか。
So first of all, thank you very much for having me. It was a pleasure to be on this podcast. So my suggestion for people in Japan is if you're a developer, be involved in what particular training program is going to be rolled out. I think there's no way around training and upskilling. I think we all agree that training is important, upskill is important. In whatever we do, we need to learn about we need to learn the skill that we need tomorrow in every profession. And I think that is for sure true in development because it's going so fast. It's going super fast. New problems come out, new programming languages come out, new frameworks come out. So my suggestion for developers is to really be involved and help pick the training, pick a relevant training that you're going to learn from and that you can say, well, you know what? I'm going to do my job faster and better tomorrow. That is my highest recommendation for developers, be involved. My suggestion is, well, don't be the slowest running zebra. That is my suggestion to people in an organization.
どうもありがとうございます。また、アプリケーションセキュリティの世界は、いろいろな問題がまだまだあります。それでまた次回にはよりもう少し技術的なトピックにもフォーカスしたり、あるいは組織的な問題にもフォーカスして、いくらか対談できると嬉しいです。今日はどうもありがとうございました。
Thank you so much, and would love to talk further on these topics.
ありがとうございました。Thank you very much.